How do you know you are? Later, type into Google, addicted to the internet, and you will be told criteria. You'll be given criteria which will tell you. You can judge, you can evaluate just how addicted you are. For example, does this happen to you? You wake up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet and you check your emails on the I see logs in there as well. Or you call up your email service provider and it says, no new messages. So you call it up again. You cannot believe that nobody has sent you an email or a text or a tweet in the last 2 minutes. And so on. There are lots of criteria of this kind. Yes, you are addicted to the internet. I'm quite sure you are. I do need to know my audience, though. How many of you, well, of course you all email. How many of you log actively? Not so many. How many of you read other people's blogs? About half of the audience. How many of you are on Facebook? Oh, I'm not even. There are certain slightly older, slightly less young people here who would not put their hands up, I suppose. But even these days, the demographic on Facebook has been going up and up and up. Whereas, how many of you tweet? About half. And read other people's tweets? And again, slightly more. But a fair number of you don't tweet. How many of you are tweeting now? We'll see about that. Yeah, the demographic of Twitter, you see, has been going the other way. When Twitter started, the average age was in the mid-30s, and now it's down to low 20s and getting into the teenage range. I was in a school the other day, half the kids in the sixth form were tweeting, you know? So the demographic of these things is going up and down like that. Very interesting. Yeah, we'll talk about all this in a minute. First of all, I should begin with an apology for those of you who came last October expecting to hear me, and maybe some of you were very inconvenienced that day when the lecture had to be cancelled at the last minute. My daughter suddenly very seriously ill on the continent. She's fine now, she's getting better. Thank you. But sorry for the postponement of the lecture. So, yes, language and the internet. I mean, the problem is, you see, that the whole thing is so recent. I mean, we're only 20 years into this thing. Let's reflect on the dates for a second. World Wide Web arrives 1991. Okay, so we're just over 20 years into the web. That's all. It's been here forever, it seems, but no, it hasn't. When did you first enter a chat room, if you ever did? Well, you wouldn't have done that before 1990, sort of 5, 6, something of that kind. I mean, chat rooms were available before, but most people didn't know about them. When did you first send an email? Again, you wouldn't have done that before about 1995 or 6, even though the technology had been around a long time. When did you first do a Google search? Well, you couldn't have done that before 1999, because that's when Google first became apparent to all of us. Instant messaging, around about the year 2000 or so. Text messaging, again, early 90s, but not actually used for texting until the early 2000s. Blogging, weblog, we'll talk about that later. Weblog, first introduced into the language in 1997, but nobody blogged until about 2002 or 3 when simple systems like Blogger came online and allowed us to do it. Facebook, 2004, YouTube, 2005, Twitter, 2006. It's all so recent. And the thing is, the recency means that the technology is changing, because the first edition of these things lasts a while, and then they do another edition, and so on. And of course, as the technology changes, so the language changes as well. And Twitter is the perfect example of this. Twitter comes around in 2006. If you had asked me in 2005 what was the next big thing on the internet, and you told me it was going to be Twitter, you're going to tell me that the next big thing is text messaging for the internet. SMS for the internet. Now, I knew what text messaging was, because it had been around about 5 years or so. Text messaging is when you take your mobile phone, and 160 characters later, you have sent a significant message to somebody else, such as, I am on the train. And this has been a hugely popular technology. If you had said to me that the next big thing is going to be, don't just send your text message to the person you sent it to, but send it to the entire world, I would have said you were nuts. That's what it is, isn't it? That's what Twitter is. Your text messages with 140 characters now, not 160. Footnote, why 140? Because if you're sending to the internet, you need to reserve a certain number of characters for your ID, and they reserved 20 characters for that, so that leaves 140, and now you send your message, so the whole world knows you're now on the train, or I am eating cornflakes, or the famous example, which really put Twitter on the map, when Stephen Fry got stuck in the lift. And he's tweeted, I am stuck in the lift, and millions and millions of people went to his tag to see when he was going to be out of the lift. I mean, it was amazing, really. But notice, you see, in relation to the language side of things, what was the prompt that you were using in those days, if your memory goes that far back? In 2006, the prompt on Twitter was, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so, I am eating cornflakes, I am stuck in the lift, or whatever. Lots of first-person pronouns, lots of present tenses, and so on. And then in November 2009, Twitter changes its prompt. And it's now, as you know, what's happening? Well, think about the difference between what are you doing and what's happening. What are you doing makes you look in, what's happening makes you look out. Suddenly there are third-person pronouns all over the place. This is happening, that's happening, he's doing it, that's doing it. Demonstrative pronouns, all sorts of things, and different tenses. This has happened, this will happen, it's about to happen. And suddenly Twitter's language changes quite dramatically. Anybody doing a PhD in the latest cutting-edge internet linguistics in 2007 and using Twitter as their data? I'm afraid you were doing historical linguistics, actually, because that's all over. You know, that language period is gone, although it's still available. That's where you can do research if you want. So you see, the thing about language and the internet, if you're a linguist, is that it's jolly difficult to generalize about it, because things are changing so much, because the technology is changing and the people who run the technology are changing the nature of the linguistic interaction, and because the demography is changing. I mean, think about the demography for a minute, in relation to emails, for instance. Email started out very young person's medium. The geeks who started email never dreamt it was going to be as successful as it proved to be. And so they deliberately spent an awful lot of time breaking the rules of the standard language and doing geeky things like you do in California and places. So they would drop punctuation, for instance, or respell words, or lose capitalization and things of this kind. We'll talk about this later. And then, as the age grew for email, so the language became increasingly more conservative. So whereas originally the only emails I would ever get once upon a time would begin something like, you know, yo Dave,